Welcome to the WebORB webinar, 10 Ways to Accelerate Your Application Development and Improve Performance. This is a recorded version of a webinar that I gave just a few moments ago, which we failed to record, and therefore I'm going to repeat here just between you and me. The 10 ways to improve your development are, first, to test drive your services; second, generate code to access your services; 3, use data binding to update your UI; 4, generate code for web services in particular; and 5, use AMF on the wire. Then 6, use WebORB data management; 7, use response catching, which is a new feature; 8, use nhibernate support, also new; and use WebORB's IDE integration, also new. Finally, use the latest version of WebORB so that you have access to all these new features. Now I'm going to go through those in more detail. This is the Hello World service from the Hello Zero server of the sample application Hello World that you'll find on WebORB's blog. And it's obviously like the world's simplest service. It just returns Hello World through the method getHelloWorldString, the class Hello World service, and the namespace Hello Zero server. Very, very simple stuff. So I'm going to save it and build it. The build succeeded, so I will now deploy it. The code is here, the hello world.dll. If we look at the details here, we can see that it was just now compiled. Yes, that's just now. I don't have a clock showing, but it's just now. And I'm going to drag that over to WebORB's bin folder to deploy it. And here's the bin folder. You can see that's in WebORB for .NET version 4.2.0.0. That's what is currently the latest deployed version or released version of WebORB for .NET. So I'm just going to drag these over and drop them into the bin folder, and that is all there is to deploying the service in WebORB. Now I'm going to go to the WebORB browser, service browser, and refresh my list of deployed .NET services to make sure that it is there, and in fact, there it is. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is test drive the deployed service. Now this is where I'd put any arguments to the function I wanted to test drive, but in this case there are no arguments. I simply invoke the function and it returns the string hello world. So now I know that the service does what I intended it to do, which is a good thing to know before I hand my server-side service over to my client-side team, or even to my, turn my hat around and become the client-side team. I want to make sure the darn thing actually works, and that's what I've just done. This is by no means a full regression test, but nonetheless I was able to do a basic test before moving on to the client side. The second way to save time and energy when doing this is to generate code for the service you then want to use. Well, I want to use the Hello World service, and here we can see here's Hello World service action script code. I can develop this for Flex or Cairngorm or Ajax or Silverlight or whatever. We support a whole zillion bunch of front ends here at WebORB and for WebORB. And so I'm going to go ahead and do it for Flex, and I'm going to create a project file so that I can test drive this as easily as possible. And then I will download that code, and it's going to save it. I'm going to choose to save it in a place where I tend to always save this stuff. And yes, I'll replace the previously generated stuff. I'm not going to open it, I'll just close it, because then I'm going to come over here to Flash Builder and import it. And this is going to take just a minute as I go through these dialogues. I'm going to select that file and this file and open. And yeah, that's where I want it, but I'm going to call it Hello World 3 and click Finish. And I don't care. And it's going to get rid of this dialog box in just a minute. And there we go. There's Hello World Service 3, which I just created. And all that code was spit out by WebORB. All right, now this, the main project file is extremely minimal. There's hardly anything to it. It's just a few lines. And if I go up here to my source and clean up my indentation, you can still see there's hardly anything to it. All right, it's just a barest shell, but we've got the Hello World service wrapped up in ActionScript code. And in the comments section, is the code you need to get started adding it to the MXML file. So let's copy that out. Well, no, let's not do that. Let's copy that out and put it into main.mxml, which is right here. I'm going to get rid of that function, which means I need to get rid of the call to that function. All right, so I'm importing these things. I need to call these things private to avoid a warning later. Great, that's easy. I'm going to go over to this project here, Hello3 client, open that project, whatever, and that has essentially the same code that I want. It's, you know, how Julia Child, when cooking something, puts the uncooked turkey into one oven and then pulls the cooked turkey out of the other oven. Well, that's what I'm doing here. Here's the working sample code. You can see those are the imports that I just pasted in and the variable declarations with the private field that I just typed in, right? Then it added a click handler function and some user interface elements, and I'll just go ahead and add those also. Except I now have too many script doohickeys. All right, so there we go. Now I can look at my user interface, and there's an error on line 2. Now you know this is real live declarations. What am I doing differently here? Let's just copy that part out too. Everything before the script. All right, now she should be good to go. Yep, it's working. That's not it. And it's just a little window with an invoke button. I press the button and up comes hello world. Okay, very simple. Now, this is the end of item number 2, which is generate code to access the services, but it brings us to the third element, which is use data binding to connect the data to your user interface. So here's the call to the service proxy's get hello world string, right? Remember, that's the function get hello world string on the server side that returns the string we're looking for. And so it calls that, and then what we're doing here on the label is binding the label's text to model.getHelloWorldString result. The model is the variable we defined right up here, right? Get hello world service model, and this is the code that we copied out of the service model wrapper file right up here. All right, and so what we've done then is when we call the function, its result gets applied to the model, and then the user interface is bound to the model result. Let's look at that model definition. That's hello world service model.action script. There it is right there. It's very simple. It is just a class with a single variable called get hello world string result of type string. If you had a longer set of functions, more complex results, of course this would be a more complex class. So that's the bottom line. We've got a call to a function, an asynchronous call to a remote function, which applies its result to a model, and then the user interface is bound to the model so that when the model changes, the user interface gets updated accordingly. Very clean model view controller type approach. The more you use that pattern, the faster you'll be at it, the fewer errors you'll create. It's a very simple model, and it's the way to go. Number 4, generate code to wrap web services. Well, this is a talking point. I'm not going to show you much here. Let me just say that this is a variation on point number 2 to generate code generally. But let's look down at the service browser again. And instead of looking at .NET assemblies, let's look at web services. Well, you noticed as it was accessing the web service there, it had a little clock spinning, a little timer spinning, and it was accessing the WSDL, the web service description language, to actually generate the description of the service and its various functions. as long as it's describing its complex data types properly, then WebORB can return to you the proper complex data types rather than strings. And so you'll never touch XML. You'll never be packing data into XML. You'll never be unpacking data out of XML. You'll just be dealing with the objects and types that your application wants to deal with. And just forget the XML. That can save you so much time compared to doing it all yourself. That alone pays for the price of admission, which of course for the developer mode of WebORB and the community edition of WebORB is absolutely free. So you'd be mad not to take advantage of it. So that's point number 4. Use WebORB code generation to wrap up web services. Going on, point number 5 is using AMF on the wire. Well, of course, that's WebORB's default, and so you don't have to do anything special to get that to happen. But let's take this page here, and I'm going to refresh that so I can start from scratch. And here's a little benchmarking tool. The code is available, so you can download the code to make it clear that we're not doing any benchmark cheating here. And what this application shows is a comparison of the speed over the wire of sending primitive values, complex types, and arrays of complex types using web services, HTTP, and AMF. So let's go through those one at a time. Here we're going to make 100 calls that send a string argument, and that's the string. You can put whatever you want in there. Let's put foo bar tomorrow, which of course means absolutely nothing. And that really should be foo bar to be historically correct. All right, so there's the run the service test. And you know, I had that problem earlier. That just shows that this is a real live demonstration. So I'm going to ignore that one and move on to this one. And wow, that was slow. And AMF, much faster. And that's sending a string back and forth. Now we'll send a complex data type back and forth. Here's the web service version. It's a tall bar. And here's HTTP, not quite so tall. And here's AMF. It got back lickety-split. The height of the bar means how long it took to get back and forth. The taller the bar, the slower it is. The shorter the bar, the faster it is. So AMF was clearly much faster. Let's do the same thing with an array of complex types. We're going to call 5 times with an array of 250 items of complex type. Okay, and first we'll do the web services calls. Tall bar indeed. HTTP, much faster, and AMF, almost instantaneous by comparison. Let's see if we can run this WebORB service. It just does not like that WebORB service. I'm sorry, that web services test. So I don't know what that bug is. We'll look into that shortly. But in the meantime, it's clear that the AMF is so much faster than any of these other approaches over the wire, and it doesn't crash the way this one does, that it's just worth using AMF in any event. And of course, all that's using WebORB. Now, there are ways you can speed that up even faster. If you look at the WebORB documentation, there's a section called performance tuning. And there's things you can do to compress the data that you're sending over the wire even more than AMF already does. And it's worth checking that out to speed things up even faster. All right, so that's it on that item, which is item number 5, use AMF on the wire. Number 6 is use WebORB data management. Now, I'm not going to talk about WebORB data management here much because I've got a bunch of new samples up on the blog that includes a screencast for your first WebORB data management for Flex application. And I encourage you to check out that screencast and those samples rather than have me talk about it here today. Now, this is not to deprecate WebORB data management. In fact, WebORB data management can probably save you more development time than all of the other development time saving techniques I'm describing in this webinar. You've got table-based relational data on your database, and you have object-oriented code on your in your code on both the client and server. So how do you deal with the impedance mismatch between object-oriented code and table-oriented data or relational data? The answer is WDMF, as described in these samples and screencasts. So I'm not going to discuss them much here. We'll also have another webinar on them shortly. That's the end of part 1.